What's up, you guys? So today we're gonna play some Virtual Cop on the Sega Model 2. This was a really fun game I had on the Sega Saturn back in the day. Let's go ahead and read it a little bit. Virtual Cop is an arcade shooter game created by Sega AM2 for Sega Model 2 hardware in 1994. It is the first in the Virtual Cop series. It was one of the first light gun games to take place in a 3D world. That was the first light gun shooter to use 3D polygons. Sega advertised it as the world's first texture map polygon action game. Yeah, that sounds about right. It was really pretty awesome when this game came out, especially when if you had a Saturn, it was pretty exclusive. Like you felt like you were pretty awesome if you owned a Sega Saturn. Not only because it was one of the most expensive consoles to own at the time, but also, exclusives like this. And, the Sega Saturn hardware was really powerful, considering the time it was out, because it could play this game like an arcade perfect copy at home. So, usually if you wanted to get a cabinet arcade game, it'd run like $1,000 to $1,500 for a cabinet game. And if you want to spend $1,000 to $1,500 for a cabinet for just one game, or would you rather spend like $300, $400 and have the same experience on a console that could play all the Sega Saturn games? So people would make sense out of it that way. Oh yeah, I'm actually saving money. I beat this game a lot because I owned it, but it's still pretty fun to come back and share this experience with you guys. So, it's a fun game. I don't really know the premise other than you're a cop trying to fight bad guys. You want to save as many prisoners as possible. I think there's three bad guys. We're gonna see one of the bad guys here. He's gonna shoot me with the rocket launcher later in the second half of this. But yeah, this is a really fun. This is the first light gun game to use 3D polygons. That's kind of impressive. And if you think about it like that, if this was the first game to have 3D polygons, these graphics aren't half bad to be the first. Think of the light gun games now and how much farther we've gone from now, right? Like we've come a long way. Thinking about it like that, right? But yeah, the Sega Saturn was really awesome. It came pre-packaged with this game and Virtua Fighter, both arcade perfect ports. It was the best to have two arcade games at your house. Couldn't be beat. But I also had Gex. I had Gex for the Sega Saturn. I had Street Fighter, the movie, the fighting game. I don't know if you ever played that game, but that game was kind of trippy. It played really well. Like the controls were really good, but just the graphics in general were not too great. There I go doing it again. I did something, guys. I made a mistake. Let's see if I can fix it. Oh, I fixed it. Eureka.
Help me!
Okay. Okay. Nothing to see here. Everything's fine. Hold on. Can I switch to full screen? Okay. Yeah, I have no idea why it just decides to leak out of the screen. That's happened. It's actually happened 3 times. You, you, you might not have noticed this, but I actually had to play this game 3 times already because that thing's happened to me already. Oh, and now it's happening again. You know what? Not cool. Not cool, dude. Not cool. I'm trying to fix it. Let's see if I can fix it.
Reload, reload, reload. Reload.
Oh.
Shoot outside the screen. Help me.
Shoot outside. Shoot outside what? Wow. Okay, nothing to see here. Everything's fine. No problems here. I'm just me enjoying one of my favorite Sega Saturn games. I'm going to be very careful about where I put my mouse from now on. You know, it's kind of nice because usually most games are like on-rail shooters, right? But because it doesn't progress until the bad guy's eliminated, I don't really lose too much progress, right? Oh, I thought there was 2 parts to this game. I guess there's just 1 part to this game.
I'll take care of you myself.
Oh, really now? Woohoo! He has a gun.
I give up, I give up. I'll talk what you want to know about a rabbit. Gotcha.
Oh, quick draw, quick draw. You ain't gonna get me, no siree, Bob. I know his tricks. Yes, I do. Woohoo! Okay. Stage 2. Let's do this. And so normally with the light gun games, there'd be a flash on screen, but there is a script that I found for this version of the game that gets rid of the flashes. So it's a lot nicer visually because the flashes were there to indicate like, oh, you're shooting a gun, but it can cause a lot of strain on the eyes. So this is just a pure gameplay experience, not including the little hiccup we had earlier, but we'll forget about that. Nothing happened. So let's see, what other games did I have? You know, the Sega Saturn wasn't very popular in America. You know, the Sega Saturn came out, and then they also had the PlayStation, and the PlayStation was just as good as the Sega Saturn on some games. There are things that Sega Saturn did better, like arcade fighting games. Sega Saturn really did good. Some of the Sega exclusives, like like Virtual Cop, Virtual Fighter, you know, they're really good games. But PlayStation just had so many games and so many developers worked for it because the coding, from what I know, was a lot easier than the Sega Saturn's coding. So the PlayStation might have lost when it came to some of its graphic capabilities and power, but there are just so many more games for the PlayStation than the Sega Saturn. And you know, the Sega Saturn just was this pumping out consoles. You know, there was the Sega Genesis, and then the first one I can remember was the Sega Master System, and that one was so old. I never had a Sega Master System, but I did have a Sega Genesis. So the Sega Genesis was a 16-bit console, and that was really fun game. That was awesome. But then after the Sega Genesis, I guess I had a handheld, the Sega Game Gear, and that was really good console handheld. It just ate batteries for breakfast. So the only real like the most common way I remember playing my Game Gear was having it plugged into the wall with an adapter, because it literally would eat batteries. You could put in 6 batteries, and you could get 2, maybe 3 hours of gameplay before you have to put in 6 brand new batteries. It was just ridiculous. Okay, so let's see, there was Sega Master System, the Sega Genesis, Sega Game Gear, and then there was this thing called the Sega Nomad, which was pretty much a portable Sega Game Gear, or Sega Genesis. Never had that though. And then there was the Sega Genesis 32X, which was an add-on to the Sega Genesis to compete against other consoles that claim to have more bits. Well, there's nothing I could really do there, was there? And never had the Sega 2, the Sega 32 Genesis add-on. It was just kind of ridiculous. There's not too many games for it, kind of pointless. But then they had another add-on for the Sega Genesis called the Sega CD, and that was good because you could play CDs, so you could listen to music, and it did have. Why'd you get in my way? Got right in my way. And there were some exclusive Sega CD games, but nothing too amazing, right? So that was a flop. That was a flop. I guess you could say the Sega Genesis was a flop, even though it had a backlight. It could play TV. It literally had an adapter so you could watch TV. It had so many good things going for it, but it just didn't have the games that Nintendo's Game Boy did. Even that being said, I still love the Sega Genesis. I loved it a lot, actually. Guaranteed the 32X for attachment for the Sega was a flop, and the Sega CD was a flop. And then right after that, they made the Sega Saturn. And the Sega Saturn was pretty awesome. Like, it had, like I said, it was really popular in Japan, where fighting games were really competitive. A lot of competitive fighting games. People were into fighting games, and that's where Sega Saturn really shined. But in America, there wasn't as big as a market for shooting games, arcade games, or fighting games, and so the options for the games were really limited unless you wanted to pay a lot of money to get imported Sega Saturn games, and I'm sure there was a region lock, so you'd have to like get your Sega Saturn configured in a way so it could play games from another region. So there's a lot of things holding it back in America. Even though I really liked my Sega Saturn, like, I really loved this game, Virtual Cop, Virtual Fighter, Gex, a couple other games, but those were the ones I had that I did remember. And so, and then just like maybe 1 or 2 years after the Sega Saturn, there was, wow, that guy looked like a bad guy, right? It wasn't just me, right? That was definitely a bad guy. So maybe like 1 or 2 years after the Sega Saturn, there was the Sega Dreamcast.
Ha ha! Sure enough, you two. So you made it this far, huh? Ha ha!
And the Sega Dreamcast was, by all accounts, Sega's best system. Like, it also had arcade perfect ports, specifically Marvel vs. Capcom 2, House of the Dead 2, all the fighters you could hope for. And the Sega game was, it's kind of dated now, but at the time it was such a great looking Sega game, and so fun too. But it also had a bunch of setbacks because Sega was known for just charging so much money for their systems and not having the games that the people wanted. And so the Sega ended up becoming bankrupt, but Sega was a pioneer when it came to arcade games, just games in general. Like, I have a lot of love for Sega, and there's a lot of things they could have done differently, and they could have still been developing consoles, and they still could have been developing arcade games, but the directions that they went didn't match up with their expectations and the consumers, so they ended up losing the console wars essentially. What can you do? Left with good memories, especially Sega arcade games and the console games. So, like this game right here. They're still making games, like, so if you're not aware, Sega actually partnered with, or decided to become its own game developing company. So it's still around, but it doesn't have as much input or impact as it used to. It's just now an independent company developer. So you can still find new Sega games, but just not like before. Oh, you're lucky. Rifle. I think my favorite's the shotgun. That was my favorite. So if, let's say Sega was the first person to make the first 3D action shooter game. Then you know what Sega did next? They made House of the Dead. And guess what? That was another 3D shooting game. And then you know what they did next? They made House of the Dead 2. And if you thought this game was good, House of the Dead was even better. And if you thought House of the Dead was good, House of the Dead 2 was like the icing on the cake. One of the best arcade shooting games that I can remember. Literally one of the best games I can remember. And then they made a sequel, Virtual Fighter 2. And once Sega really started to get down their shooting games, more people came to follow. Namco started making their own shooting games. And what was that? Can someone explain to me what just happened there? Because I don't think I did anything wrong. But Sega was the first one to do it. That's what I mean like by pioneering. They did a lot of things first. You know, what else did they do? Pocket games. They did that for the Dreamcast. They made it so you could play a little game on the memory card. I would say, from the best that I know, Sega did a lot better in Japan than anywhere else. Like, a lot of people love the Sega. And a lot of that can be credited to their ad campaigns. I saw that there was this guy who was a sponsor for Sega Saturn, and he was pretty much told people that he would kick their butts if they didn't buy a Sega Saturn, or they're puny and weak for buying a PlayStation when the Sega Saturn is so powerful. Oh, that action looks pretty familiar. It's your House of the Dead fan. Yeah. And you know what? I was really lucky to have a Sega Saturn because it's, from what I am aware of, a Sega Saturn was like $400, and my parents, they really wanted to give me everything that I wanted, me and my brother. So we had all the systems. We had the Nintendo, we had the Super Nintendo, we had the PlayStation, we had the Nintendo 64, we had the Sega Saturn, we had the Dreamcast. Not only did we have every console that came out, like, you know, I would say within the 90s, they were making a new console every 1 to 2 years. Like, if it wasn't a new console, it was a new game. You know, or of course they're making a bunch of games, but you know, it felt like they were just full of games and consoles. So one of the best things I remember was going to Toys R Us, and you know, my mom would be like, "Okay, what game do you want today?" And I would just go pick out a game, and then I'd get a game. And honestly, I'm not even joking, I would do that like once a month. Once every couple of weeks, we'd just go to Toys R Us and I'd buy a game. And so, by the time I left high school, you know, because, you know, I got my first console like before I was born. They had the Nintendo. You know, the Nintendo was made in like 1987 or 86. I was born in 88. So there's already consoles in my house. Like, my babysitters and my nannies, they had 2 kids, and so they had that. So I just grew up with consoles my whole life. So, you know, not only was I getting a game or 2 every month, but for my birthday and Christmas, it was like 12 games for that day, or for my birthday, it'd be like 3 games, 4 games for my birthday, or a brand new console. It was just ridiculous. I think I remember the last time I counted all the Super Nintendo games I had was like 150. I had like 150 Super Nintendo games. I had like 70 Nintendo games, 70 Sega Genesis games, like 50 or 60 PlayStation games, 20, 25 Sega Genesis games, bunch of Game Boy, Game Boy Advance, Game Boy Color.
You'll regret being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Okay. And the consoles I had the least games for were the Sega Saturn, was the Game Gear, because they just they weren't accessible. They weren't accessible in America, and I wasn't too interested in fighting games, to be honest. I'm not the biggest fighting game connoisseur.
This chopper is all I need. I'm through with you two. Now you meet
I thought that was that guy. I was gonna say that guy went down pretty fast. Yeah, so I'm not the biggest fighting game guy, you know. Some of the more popular fighting games are like Dark Stalkers with Morgan or Morgana. Morgana? No, it's Morgan, like the vampire chick, and Anubis, and Street Fighter. Street Fighter is a really popular fighting game. I mean, I enjoyed it, but it was never the game that I really would go out of my way to get or spend a lot of time doing it, because I just figured, okay, a fighting game. You fight some guys, you beat it, and that's all. You know, but the nuances to the fighting game is that there's the skill ceiling, right? So it's easy to beat, hard to master. And I have a brother who loves fighting games. He was one of the best fighting games in the state. I could probably say that, honestly. One of the best fighting for Marvel vs. Capcom 2 and Tekken. He just pop 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 just smacked them down. And yeah, good times. I was actually amazed because he could do this combo with King and Tekken. And if you're not, if you don't know, in Tekken there's a character who wears a lion's mask, and he's a wrestler. And if you grab him, you can chain these grabs to do like 6 different grabs. So if you do it right, he grabs you, and then he'll flip you, and then he'll turn you, and then he'll smack you, and then he'll choke you, and then he'll break your arm, and then he'll break your leg. Oh, it was pretty awesome. Woohoo, look at that, first place. I mean, of course it's first place. How could I not get first place? Um, okay, but yeah, let's see. Thank you for watching. I will see you next time. Bye. Hey, how's it going? Okay, so let's see. I just finished my um my quick game stream. So if you're still here, I'm going to set up right now to do my Pokemon Gold or Soul Silver stream, and so I will be doing that. So hold on, let me just upload that game that I just finished. That was Virtual Cop on the Sega Model 2. Here's my folder. Oh, there it is. Gotta wait for it to finish up. And then we'll do some Pokemon Soul Silver. I just finished the 3rd gym, and my brother, he wants me to grind at this casino to get some TMs, but I'm not going to do that. It's kind of boring, and I got the Pokemon that I wanted. I got a Dratini, and there's items that I could get, but I can just wait for another time. Not something I necessarily have to do right now. Oh, I'm still recording. Whoopsies.